Fazal, you star in Victoria and Abdul as Abdul Karim, who develops a close bond with Queen Victoria during the later portions of her life. How did the opportunity for this role come about?
Well, I was sitting actually like this with a business associate of mine, and she told me that the auditions were happening the week before. I was late, and she said, let's just try it. Let's get you there. I recorded 2 scenes, I remember, on my phone, and we sent it. And I got a call back about 25 days later, and they said that they liked your scene, and Stephen Frears is coming down to India with Biban Kidron, and they're going to meet more actors, but they want to meet you. And I just remember going through a long process of it was like a video game, just crossing like levels and levels just to get to Stephen Frears at the end of it somewhere, and it was nice because I flew down to London at the same time, to the studios there. Did some readings, look tests, came back, still not in. And finally I get the call. I remember I was sitting in a bar at my friend's birthday or something, and I got a call saying, and I remember being happy, but not very happy because it was scary at the same time, because there was so much work to be done on this man. And there's so little information on Abdul Karim.
And the diaries that he left behind were only discovered in recent years. What was that preparation process like to, once you had the role, to kind of figure out who this guy was and what his life was like to try and really convey that in a full, complete way?
Well, I mean, it was quite a bit of research that I had to do. I told everyone I told everyone I read the book, but I didn't. I started reading it, and I thought Lee Hall had written a very, very interesting script, and he had a very fantastical approach to it. And I thought, he doesn't talk about timelines in the film. It could be 5 days, and yet it's 15 years. I then decided to go through a lot of history books just of that time. I mean, I must have read a lot. God, I wish I did that in school. But it was fun because there were so many departments helping me get there and sort of flesh out Abdul Karim. Almost mathematically trying to pinpoint him in the scheme of these historic events, with costumes, with the handwriting, from the ink he used in his pens, the Urdu, the English, and just the way certain medals and certain costumes were made. They were made for that particular time, for that particular status that he had in the royal court, which began him being a servant, and then, of course, progressing along the years and becoming the munshi and becoming a political advisor on behalf of India at one point. It was a collaboration of a lot of things, and of course, a large part of it had to be, my face on it, and my voice, and yeah, it was scary, but it was, I mean, it's a responsibility, I guess. I don't know. It's hard to really gauge if you're right. There's nothing really right. It's 130 years down, stuff trickles out. It's almost like Chinese whisper, you don't know what to rely on. So you rely on something that's honest, I guess. And I tried to find that with Judi and the relationship we shared, and hope that it worked.
And it must have been, of course, quite a difference. You go from recording scenes on your phone, to try and get to role, and suddenly you're full costume on set. This large and detailed production design element. Did that help it get into the character of the film, get into the time frame and the mindset?
Oh yeah, hell yeah! I think that was one of the biggest parts, and the reasons why I could transport myself to that era, to that time. Consolata Boyle, I mean, she's the reason behind all the costumes, and she's a maestro. Because if you really notice, the film takes you through those 15 years using costumes. So it's the costumes that really tell the time. gives you, just the heaviness of the costumes, or the the little details. I mean, I remember standing all day just not being able to sit because my costumes would not allow me to sit, and crease up the way it would crease up on a modern chair. So they were very specific, and it sort of gave you an insight on how these people live their lives. Just so much patience, day in and day out, just standing upright, like straight, because you were part of that robotic culture, that the royal etiquette, or whatever you call it. It did help, of course. Yeah, it had to.
And the relationship, of course, the core relationship between Victoria and Abdul, it almost plays like a romantic comedy at times. They sort of, meet cute when he's presenting her with the traditional Indian coin, and then they kind of break up at a certain point, and then they get back together. But of course, it's not romantic in that sense. How did you work with Judi Dench to kind of develop that complex but really loving dynamic between these two that they had for so many years?
I think she's so wonderful, right? She's such a loving person. She is, my God. I mean, she's royalty. She's Dame Judi Dench. She's someone who I've idolized all my life, and then you get to work with her, so you meet her, and this is me day one. Walking into a room, I'm this stranger, and she's just given me the warmest hug. And it just became so easy after that. We shared laughs, we shared notes on India. She loves India, and it was this wonderful start to a relationship where today I can say she's a friend of mine. If I like to think that, and I think that really helped, because on set we were, she was so open to rehearsals. I would walk into her van, we would just sit and do our lines, or I'd teach her Urdu, good information on Shakespeare, and just things that she's been through. And yeah, it was I think that really helped, just the ease of it. And she makes you look good. She made my job easier, if I can say that. And that really helped, because I think the relationship, it talks of love, like you said. There's something very romantic about it, and yet very maternal, and yet very a relationship that a teacher and a student share. So it was respect in many ways. It was this sort of embrace that was there. I remember reading one of her letters, and the way she would sign off at the end was amazing. Because sometimes she would write, or from a loving mother to a son, or sometimes she would write off saying, the Queen misses her munshi, come back, my friend. And another one would say, the Queen misses you, come back, hold me tight. Strong words for a monarch to say to anybody, I guess. It's just confusing.
But it must have been a little easier in the sense of, you walk onto the set with someone who has the stature in the industry that Judi Dench does. It's almost the way Abdul would have viewed Queen Victoria as this kind of awe-inspiring figure. So it must not have been that hard to kind of identify with how he viewed Victoria, given that you're suddenly working with Dame Judi Dench.
Oh yeah, yeah. I think I found myself flirting with her many times. So, and looking up to her at the same time. And yeah, I guess it did help. It was pretty much like probably the way it might have been back then. Um, oh yeah, for sure.
There are a lot of warm and funny moments between Victoria and Abdul, but there are also heavier moments, particularly later on in Victoria's life. When he's being persecuted by the rest of the household, and her health is starting to fail.
Yeah.
What were some of the most challenging scenes to shoot? Kind of from an emotional perspective.
Honestly, I think one of my toughest scenes was the first time that he meets her. I mean, the first time that he's in the study with her, and the first time that they really talk to each other, because that was a very complex scene. It was, it was yet this urge to say something, because he was just someone who was talkative and he just wanted to talk to her. And there was servitude at the same time, and a very interesting dynamic that they shared, because it was this uneasiness, and yet suddenly that breaks into a comfort zone that they immediately share. I mean, he's out there, painting this picture for her on the carpet and sitting down and talking about, the way, I mean, almost poetic about the carpet and the weaving and everything. For scenes, I think. I mean, of course, there are heavier scenes at the end of the film, and you think they are, and of course, they are hard because they are more intense. But by then, I think something had triggered, in or channelized within each other and within ourselves as actors, that it might have helped. But the earlier scenes, which are new, and that when that relationship is building, is tough ones, I think. As an actor, just for me, I feel one of my favorite scenes is the scene in Florence, though, when they're dancing together, and I thought that was one of the most honest scenes we've had.
And throughout the film, Abdul seems to be very unassuming and full of wonder about this world and about Victoria. But he's also managing to advance in status in ways that, of course, members of the royal household really resent. Did you feel like his success was primarily coming down to how much affection he had for Victoria, or do you think he was savvier than maybe people gave him credit for in terms of knowing how to be politic and endear himself in the right ways?
Oh yeah. I think he was very smart, and I don't think there's anything bad in being an opportunist. He was young, he was ambitious, and he never came there to do that. He came there to present a mohar and go back. It happens. There's a shift in the gear. He befriends the most powerful woman on planet, and something spiritual starts to brew. She was almost obsessive. She would write to him almost 5 times a day when he wasn't there, and even when he was there, she would write him letters while he was there in the empire. So it gave him confidence. It gave him this sense of being an individual who was recognized for what he was, for who he was, and for where he came from. He wasn't judged for once because of his color or race or costumes or culture, and he used that to rise up, this social ladder, and climb it, and take the most of it, make the most of it.
Another important relationship in the film is between Abdul and Muhammad, played by Adil Akhtar, who travels with him from India, and they become kind of friends, since they're both kind of in this new world. And then, of course, Muhammad ends up becoming Abdul's servant. What was it like filming, those scenes, especially early on, that develops a lot of the humor in the film is between those two?
Oh yeah, that was fun. I mean, Adil's a really good actor, and I've loved his work before, and it was really nice to have that exchange. I remember we did a lot of optional scenes for the scenes that you might have seen in the film. There was a lot of times we did those scenes in Urdu. Of course, it was a creative choice to finally go ahead with some of those scenes being in English. It was a very interesting relationship. And sometimes you don't like Abdul for what he did, because he almost reached a point where he neglected his friend. Um, he could have done a lot more to help him, but I think he was in this sort of glaze, and love, or whatever it was, for the queen, that he just didn't see anything. And for him, it was the end all. It reminded me of Rumi. If you've heard of Rumi, one of the greatest poets of love, and very spiritual. He was a rich man, a preacher, and he had a family. And then came Shams, this Sufi dervish, this man who fell in love with Rumi, and Rumi fell in love with Shams. So all the poems that he started writing was because of Shams, of Tabriz. and he ruined his family, everything, people who he loved, not because he wanted to, but because he was drunk in this, the madness of this relationship, and it was something spiritual, little more than just intimacy of two lovers. It's a lot of respect. Yeah.
A lot of what we get from Muhammad, in addition to that interpersonal relationship with Abdul, is we see the British Empire from certainly a much less generous point of view from his perspective, and as you said, even Abdul sometimes from a less generous point of view from his perspective, given how he starts to become neglected in and left in England kind of to his own devices when he doesn't really want to be there. Did his point of view influence how you played Abdul, or how you viewed the scenes?
Of course. Yeah. Yeah, it did, because I think Muhammad's character mirrors the emotion of the entire nation, the entire country in India, to a certain aspect, because he there's and which is why you feel like there's no glorification of the British Empire, there's no glorification of the British Raj in India. It's almost mocks it. Playing Abdul became even more of a challenge, because you don't want him to be someone who supports, and he never did. But you don't want to portray someone who's this supporter of oppression. Not see that. He chose to see, almost give everybody the benefit of the doubt wherever he was. And that didn't work for him eventually. In the end, nothing did. He tried to just talk to the queen, share knowledge, and share this energy with her. And she did with him. Intellectually they stimulated each other, and they just wanted to spend time. The Britishers didn't like that, disrupting the entire royal household. um, and I feel he brought it upon himself, and I think he knew his doom went hand in hand with the rise every single step. But he went on. Yeah.
The film shows us a lot of the British royal house and customs and traditions from Abdul and Muhammad's point of view, and it seems very strange and unusual and bizarre from their perspective. Have you had like fish out of water experiences that helped you relate to Abdul, like maybe on this film, or any other experiences that helped you, kind of relate to being in this alien world?
Well, I remember that, well, on this film, of course, because it was my first time in London. And I mean, I've traveled in life, but I just somehow never happened to be in London. And I traveled to London on this film for the first time. I meet Judi for the first time. So it was pretty much like the movie. But I remember one of my first experiences, which was like fish out of the water experience, I guess, would be on Fast and Furious, because it's this larger than life set, with these swanky sports cars, and there's Vin Diesel and Paul Walker and the whole gang, and part seven. And my God, I couldn't believe what I was in. It was almost, I mean, just yeah, just out of everything I'd ever experienced, and being there doing this part in the middle of, I mean, because technologically they're so good, and I know that India is about at least a good 15 to 20 years behind. Just in this bit of a culture shock happened. But that's the same thing that happened to me when I entered London, and when we entered those massive sets. I would just be looking up at these palaces and these wonderful buildings that we were shooting in, for Victoria and Abdul. I remember Lee Hall coming up to me and saying, this is it. That's exactly what I want Abdul to be, or feel like, because this is exactly what might have happened. I mean, my mouth was just open. I was looking at the ceilings, because all the ceilings are so beautifully painted, and these famous artists who've their this wonderful work.
And this story, is more than a century old, but it does feel interestingly relevant today in the climate of a lot of racial resentments around the world and nationalism around the world that we've seen growing. What do you hope viewers will take away from this film now in 2017 that might be able to something you could learn or think about how it affects your the current society we're in.
Well, I think it's such a nice tester because if the audiences go back and start talking about how, oh God, it's this story about the British Empire and about why aren't you talking about this, and we went through that, and there's 200 years of oppression there. The point is, this visual doesn't fit. You see the poster, there's an Indian man, two people from totally opposite ends of the spectrum. They come together in the middle of this chaotic time, not a very good time. India was going through a very, very rough period. We were literally being split open, and abused. I mean, we were fresh out of the mutiny, and here was the Victorian era, which was at its peak. We have the Industrial Revolution flourishing, um, and then these two people meet in the middle of that and share this respect and love. And I hope that people see that we've tried war and politics for over 100 years and hasn't got us very far. I say this to a lot of people. I say, the costumes have changed, but not much else. There's still racism, except I think it was far more straightforward back then. You're Indian, you're Muslim, get out. Now we have very politically correct words, that are used, that, I don't know, very diplomatic. Everybody's so diplomatic, and the idea is to shed your ego. These two people could be two nations, just being able to talk to each other and shedding ego and having a dialogue. And in today's world, as simple as that sounds, I feel it's so important to just be able to have a dialogue. We've had one man walk in and say, I'm going to annihilate the entire country if we feel threatened, go to war with Iran or North Korea. And I mean, it's preposterous. It's sad. That's what humanity's come to. I think we knew while filming that it does resonate with so much that's happening. I mean, so much more. Not just America, not just India, so many other countries. I can only hope. It's so cliched to use words like love and hope now. When coming out of my mouth, I feel, am I allowed to say it? Because it's been used and abused. But that's essentially what it is.
Well, I want to congratulate you on the film, and I want to thank you for chatting with me today. It's been a pleasure.
Thank you. It's been really nice. Thank you.